Hello, my name is Anna Svensson and I do research about plants, usually as a historian working on botanical collections. I'm organising a stream on plants, a stream being a thematic group of sessions at the conference Streams Transformative Environmental Humanities, organised by the KTH Environmental Humanities Laboratory and the Division of History of Science, Technology and Environment at KTH Royal Institute of Technology in Stockholm. The conference was to have been held in Stockholm last summer, but it's been postponed and will now be online between the 3rd and the 7th of August this year. So the stream I'm organising is called A Green Turn: How Plants Are Shaping the Environmental Humanities Landscape, and it's a response to the growing momentum around plant research beyond the natural sciences, which has variously been called plant humanities or simply plant studies, and it's reflected in a range of study programs, publications, research projects, and even exhibitions. So the aim of A Green Turn is to provide a space for dialogue between these different plant researchers from different disciplines and practices based on the common ground that plants can provide, but also taking into account the challenges in the different disciplinary perspectives that they represent. So this diversity of perspectives is vital in the face of alarming rates of extinction, habitat loss, and climate change. Yet the same diversity can be an obstacle to communication and collaboration between not only the two cultures of the humanities and sciences, but within what I'm, for the purposes of this stream, calling the environmental humanities landscape. So you have eco-criticism, critical plant studies, environmental history, history of science, multi-species studies, ethnobotany, art practice, and other fields, which all have their various ideologies, terminologies, and research practices. So in order to encourage dialogue between perspectives, the stream is organised at different plant scales. At this provisional stage, the stream's 4 sessions include 3 more traditional sessions with paper presentations and an interactive exhibition focusing on interactions or encounters with actual plants, although with the move online, we're working on how to adapt this to the virtual format. The first session explores plants at the individual level of sort of individual species, and the second and third on plant-people collectives. So gardening in cities on the one hand and forests on the other. In this trailer, 5 participants in the stream present their research in the form of brief taster videos. From the first session, Emily Corner presents Reimagining Nature for Plant Conservation, the story of Encephalartos woodii and botanic gardens. The second and third videos explore practices traditionally associated with botany, as in Dr. Tilly Hinton's Urban Herbarium in the Melrose project, Nature Under Our Feet, and with art history or botanical illustration in Jessie Chen's Planting Pigments, Painting Plants. The final 2 videos extend semiotics to forest encounters, as Annika Druge's More Than Human and Dr. Carolina Luma's The Forests of Poetry. So because the conference will be fully online, this opens up opportunity for a wider conversation and wider participation. So I hope that we'll see many of you there online.
Hi, I'm here to tell you about the Melrose Project. I'm Tilly Hinton, and I'm based in Los Angeles, where I continue my work of paying attention to neglected, ignored, or derided landscapes. My focus for the Melrose Project is the plants that disappear under our feet. I'm taking a 6-mile long hyper-urban street of Los Angeles. It begins on the western edges of a suburb called Silver Lake, proceeds through East Hollywood, Hollywood proper, and then ends in West Hollywood. Melrose is not a street to linger on. It's a functional kind of street. It tends in gridlocked traffic to move people fairly slowly, and that might be one of the few reasons that a person would linger on Melrose, but they do so idling in their car rather than exploring what the streets and the pavements have to offer. And so that's what I'm doing. I'm valorizing plants by painstakingly collecting them. And then I bring them back here and I press them. My brief to myself is to collect plant materials, but sometimes I can't help myself if I find a pressable human-made object like this chewing gum packet. During the pandemic, of course, there's been masks and gloves. There are always cigarette butts, and there's also a tremendous amount of human hair. I do find myself collecting some of those as well to try and convey the spirit of the street. And of course, there's limitations to that because I am only collecting things that are possible to press. So the ample amounts of garbage, plastic containers, chipped packets, broken bottles, all of those things, they remain unpressed and undocumented in this project. But what I'm seeking to do with the Melrose Project is to take you on a walk for the 6 miles, or we could even call it 12 miles because there are the north and south sides of the street, of course, to take you on a reflective walk, exploring what kinds of botanical diversities exist in these hyper-urban landscapes, and to wonder together about the attentiveness that we do or do not pay to plants, about the distribution of green space and plant materials and the correlations of that with wealth and privilege, and also to reflect on the varied and changing nature of the communities that nestle against either side of Melrose. And it's in West Hollywood that the one and only public open space exists. It's not a park as you might imagine it. It's the rooftop of a luxury furniture store called Restoration Hardware. If you climb all the way to the top of that staircase, you get to a very unexpected rooftop. It's 100,000 square feet of olive grove, of couches, of candles, and views to the Hollywood Hills. And you feel like somehow you just stepped inside an interior design magazine for a minute. In the entire 6 miles of Melrose Avenue, that is the only area that is gazetted, accessible, public open space. It's only public or open, of course, when the furniture store is, and only to people who know about it and who feel comfortable frequenting it. East Hollywood, at the beginning of Melrose Avenue at its eastern end, we're seeing this real gentrification battle play out. And in the middle, in Hollywood proper, there are big production studios, film industry production studios. There is also a great deal of homelessness and disadvantage peppered all along this street. And so this is not a place that you would go to pay attention to plants, which is the very reason that I am attracted to do exactly that. And why in Sweden in 2021, I'll be inviting you to do the same by poring over this collection of photographs, this digital herbarium of what it is that persists along Melrose Avenue and what we can learn about plants, about the power of paying attention, and about why valorizing forgotten plants and neglected landscapes is a crucial element of learning to live well in cities and learning to live well in these profoundly complex ecological times. I don't know if you can tell behind me how hot it is and how smoky it is, but we are besieged right now by the worst wildfires that California has ever known in recorded history. They come on the back, of course, of heat waves and an ongoing pandemic, we are in an ecological and social mess. And whilst it might seem indulgent to be pressing flowers, I argue that it is more important than ever to pay close attention to the plants that surround us but that we miss, and to think about the impacts of their presence and indeed of their absence on our quality of life and on the quality of life of the more than human world.
Hi, my name is Jessie Chen, and I'm a PhD candidate at Utrecht University in the Netherlands. As part of A Green Turn, I'll be contributing to an interactive exhibition on the topic of lake pigments. This subject came from my dissertation research, for which I'm investigating the artistic and knowledge production of 17th century European botanical watercolors. A big part of my project delves into the materials and techniques of historical watercolors, including the pigments, binders, and painting surfaces like paper and parchment. I focus on the hands-on practices and apply performative method that can be best described as historical remaking as a way to ask questions and find answers. Broadly speaking, I am reproducing a range of selected botanical watercolors by closely examining the originals and using art materials that are as close as 17th century ones as possible. When feasible, I also make the art supplies from scratch. Among all the materials I have worked with so far, lake pigments, in particular, are really interesting from a plant perspective. Simply put, to make a lake pigment, one extracts the dye from a dyestuff, oftentimes a plant, and use the dye to color a substrate, such as alum and chalk. Once dried, the dye substrate becomes the pigment to be mixed with a binder for painting. In the case of watercolor paint, the pigment is mixed with gum arabic and water. Historically, plants like madder root and weld are the common dyestuff in the early modern period. Today, lake pigment making is still practiced by many artists and practitioners, who often experiment with unconventional dyes from all kinds of plants, including sunflowers and pomegranates. My part of the exhibition will show the historical context and processes of lake pigment making by following recipes from early modern Europe, in combination with some experimental colors with non-traditional plant-based dye stuff. Through the practice of lake pigment making, I hope it can provide some food for thought on the utilitarian and practical knowledge of plants in artistic production.
In our language, there is a so-called old forest near where I live. I walk in the forest several times a week with a dog. There we are, different species together. Some move, some stand still. For how long do I have to stay in the forest to be a part of it? Or do I have to wait for the eternal rest? I'm attracted to fern. Scientifically, they are close relatives to prehistoric trees that existed in the mid-Devonian time, 350 million years ago. What if the fern could tell me about its capacity of adaptation and long-term existence? Plants and animals, so-called non-humans, are able to make meaning to signify. Perhaps we simply do not understand the way they express themselves outside our strict codes of the limited languages of the natural and social sciences. To be alive is to be intrinsically semiotic. I introduced a quirkbot with the blue lights to the fern, carrying a message, a sign from me that I am there, as if the plant had not already sensed it. Non-human sensibility can be neither disentangled nor detached from humans' sensibility. There we are, sensing and at some level changing each other.